Okay, good evening from Tennessee, Middle Tennessee. Actually, we're technically at the geographic center of Tennessee. Today, it's my pleasure to talk to you, to share with you my experiences working with technology or teaching online. And our topic today is how to enrich the materials presented from textbook using authentic materials. And I will go over first my talking points. So we'll start with a discussion, a very brief discussion about textbook language. And then we'll talk about, in terms of pedagogical considerations, how to enrich textbook language with authentic materials. And then I will move on to our discussion about the ideas of tools for incorporating authentic materials for online teaching. And this will be the main part of my talk tonight. And if we still have time, I will just mention very briefly some challenges or some technical issues that are concern for incorporating authentic materials into online language teaching. So let's start with a brief look at textbook language. Now, in terms of teaching of the online teaching, usually the online content, learning content, will come from two sources. If you follow a curriculum, usually, especially for example, for hybrid courses, usually we'll follow a textbook. Or sometimes we'll have a package provided by third parties, such as publishers. And sometimes, and as far as I know, in a few online language programs, course instructors also create their own materials. But in general, we would adopt a textbook and use it online and follow the curriculum. Now, as far as those textbook materials are concerned, here are some generic or general properties. First, in many cases, the online material is adopted from print media. For example, in our language, in our Chinese language programs, we use Chinese link as for the classroom teaching. And also Pearson, who is publisher of the My Language Lab, the online language learning systems, also has Chinese link online, which is basically a kind of adaptation of the print version into the online format. Now, since we're talking about textbooks, usually textbook materials, or in general textbook languages, are used in many times. Let me turn my chat here. Hold on. Usually, for textbook materials, they are kind of adapted or very often edited or modified to for learning purposes. So the language is typical in the sense that, for example, we will choose the most frequently used materials, and then we will also have some typical expressions and weed out something which we think are really not necessary. Now, as far as the languages are concerned, we also notice that they are restricted in diversity. For example, my favorite example here is my students. For example, they always ask me, can you teach me some swearing words in Chinese? It's something that we usually textbooks will want to avoid, but very often students would like to know something about. So in this case, another problem with textbooks are that they make the same assumptions about their users or learners, and the same content is provided for each and everyone. So how to enrich textbook languages? So the answer, I mean, it's a no-brainer, is that we want to use real stuff. In other words, we want to use authentic materials. Now, in this case, how do we, if we want to use authentic materials for teaching or to use them as a supplement in addition to our textbook, how do we do it? Let me start with a very brief discussion about what counts as authentic materials. I'm pretty sure everybody knows or have some ideas about the concept. If you look at Gilmore 2007, usually when we talk about authentic materials, we're talking about languages produced by native speakers for native speakers to consume. Or there are other times when, for example, we can take authentic materials as those that are produced by real speakers for kind of real message or for real communications. But in any case, those materials are not designed or produced in the first place for language learning. And being that the case, so in the kind of traditionally in the brick and mortar classroom, here are the kind of so-called authentic materials that we often use, which can be categorized into 4 categories actually. So one is those materials that can be used for listening or viewing, TV shows, movies, radio broadcasts, etc. And another category of authentic materials are those, for example, that are presented for visual effects or for viewing. In this case, we have posters, street signs in particular, and picture books. And the third category falls usually it's the main category that we often talk about when we think about authentic materials. Those are books, newspapers, anyway, all these printed materials and stuff. And the last category is the real stuff. For example, very often when we teach about time, we would bring a real clock into the classroom. And when we talk about cultures, usually we'll bring our costumes into our classroom. So those are in a kind of very traditional brick and mortar classroom. Now, when we move on to an online environment, technically, all the materials will be presented in electronic format. Now, this is the case when both the instructor and the students are not going to meet offline, meaning if they're not going to have physical meetings. So everything is conducted online. So everything will be presented online in electronic format. In the early days of the internet, usually we talk about web pages and multimedia, but nowadays we want to include materials from our mobile phones or mobile devices, all these apps. So in terms of pedagogical considerations, whenever we want to incorporate authentic materials into online teaching, we have first of all to consider content, which includes, first of all, is it relevant from my current curriculum? I'm pretty sure whether you're new students or experienced teachers, everybody will have some ideas about which one, what kind of materials will be appropriate for my curriculum or for the class I'm teaching. And we also need to think about topic or cultural appropriateness. Since we're talking about real stuff, real language, so it is the instructor's job or responsibility to filter out anything that you think will be inappropriate for your students. Now, the next consideration that we want to have is about the language, since everything's real. So it's the real language used, and very often that translates into vocabulary, grammar, or discourse that we often call uncontrolled, meaning that they are produced for native speakers or for real jobs, or for real communication that may not be suitable for to be used as teaching materials. And the one more thing to consider is the what I call language difficulty, meaning that, for example, if you're teaching beginning level students, you're not going to pick a news story and ask your students to read the news text. So these things should be taken into consideration when we talk about when we want to use authentic materials to supplement the one or our textbook. So how to incorporate authentic materials technically or in terms of language pedagogy? Generally speaking, we talk about 3 steps, or we talk about 3 considerations. The first one is whenever you have something in mind, or if you're going to use some authentic materials to supplement your textbook language, the first stage is to select and prepare your material. That means we want to weed out the unwanted stuff. And I'm going to talk about the tools later, but here is the kind of a general pedagogical description about what we should do in terms of preparing materials. Then our next big job is to provide support for our students' learning, meaning that once we have our materials ready, we need to use tools or technology that will facilitate our learners' comprehension of the materials. And we also want to bridge the gap between our students' knowledge and the kind of cultural information or knowledge that is required to understand authentic materials. So we want, again, we want support. We want to provide support for our students' learning. And the third step in considering using authentic materials is to create practice opportunities or opportunities for practice and application of the materials that we select. This will include, for example, both input and output activities. And also we want to enable or facilitate interactions among our students. And we want to engage them in kind of group interaction when we talk about learning using those authentic materials. Okay, so once we got that kind of basic background in mind, let's move on to the real stuff in my talk today. So I want to share with you some ideas or the tools for incorporating authentic materials for online language teaching. And before we start, here again is the highlight of the pedagogical considerations that we want to keep in mind when we talk about incorporating the real stuff. First, we want to select and prepare our materials appropriately so that they can be used for learning purposes. And second, we want to provide practice opportunities for our students so that they can interact with the materials that we provide. And then thirdly, we want to engage our students in all these interactions with even the materials or with themselves when they work with the learning materials. So let's start with the first one. In the online, in the online language environment, when we talk about selection and preparation of authentic materials, we actually talk about dealing with these three things. So basically, we're talking about dealing with image, video, or text. Those are, in general, the three categories of the materials that we're going to work with. And then, as far as the sources of those materials are concerned, we're talking about files, very often media files like video clips, audio clips, images, and also text files. And those will come from, for example, websites, individual web pages, or even apps. Nowadays, when we move on to the kind of online environment, the screen capture of the real, very often we do screen captures of real apps in use and use them as our teaching materials. So our first job here is, for example, when we work with images, very often the job of working with images is really simple. We just take image from either a website or somewhere or from a camera and use it for our teaching. Now, but sometimes there's a need to kind of use part of the image so that the content presented in the image will not interfere with some contents from the image will not interfere with the language that we want to teach. So technically, that means there's a need for us to kind of to crop an image. And here's my example here. Now imagine that we find an image here. Steve, can I share the image?
Yes, you should be able to share an image when you designate share screen, you have to tell Zoom which application it is that you want to share.
So I stop share my PowerPoint and then start reshare.
Yeah, try that.
Okay, I see it. Hold on, let me find my image here. Okay, so let's see. Let's say I find, in this case, this is a Chinese train tickets. This is real, and I want to use it in my class. Usually, for example, if you look at Chinese link, the Chinese textbook, the train ticket is kind of is printed, is made up, is artificial in a sense. So we want to use some real stuff. And in the case of using a real ticket, in this case, this is really simple. All you have to do is to view the image or share the link with the students. Okay, so that's when you work with a single image where there's no need to crop out anything. Now let's move back to another image. In this case, we want to, hold on, let me just copy the link here. So imagine that we're teaching about traveling, for example, in Shanghai, and by taking the subway, and we want to use that metro map as part of our teaching material. Now, since there are so many stations, our students will lose focus about which one we talk about. In this case, I want to crop the image and to get the job done. So imagine that we just want to use part of the image here. Now, there are many tools of doing image cropping. And if you're using Windows, that's the build system built-in image like Microsoft Paint. You can do it. If you use Mac, you can use iPhoto or any other cropping, image cropping tools. Now, in the case of online tools, here's one that, for example, we can try. Now, this is a website where we can just paste the image URL into the input field here and do the image cropping. And this is, in my opinion, is a handy tool. For example, if you want to have something done here. So if we want to do the cropping here, and we, for example, let me move back here. So we want to crop the image and get something. This is the portion I want to use for my language class. And you can right click to save the image, or we can share it through Facebook, etc. Okay, so let me move back to my PowerPoint. So as I mentioned, sometimes we need to modify the authentic material so that they will be suitable for classroom teaching. And image is one example here. And as I mentioned, we can use either system building tools or we can use some online tools. Now, the next kind of source of authentic materials usually is video. And I'm pretty sure everybody is familiar with YouTube. And here's one example here. What if I just want to share part of a YouTube video? Hold on, let me. Steve, can I see the chat so that I can paste the link?
Yes, to see the chat, move your mouse over your screen and you should see a balloon down below called chat. That might only be possible when you're not inside. You have to choose the Zoom icon from your active applications. Right now you're in PowerPoint.
Let me see,
So the zoom.us application needs to be active, and then you can see the chat balloon button.
Let me stop sharing for a moment.
All right.
Okay, so let me post the link first before I talk about the YouTube here. Can you all see the link to the YouTube video?
The link is visible in the chat, yes.
Okay, so very often when we want to use online video, especially for example in the case of YouTube, all we need, for example, is probably just one portion or one part of the video. And if you are familiar with the functions of YouTube, that actually you can choose when to start the video or from which position of the video clip that you want to start. So in this case, I just create a link. I just share the link through the chat room. You can click on it. If you look at the URL, that's at the end of the URL, you have the T equals 644. And this is a video about kind of restaurants in China, or in Shanghai. And again, we can just use the built-in functions to kind of show portion or part of the video in the case of online teaching here. Okay, so let's move on to another one. Another job that very often we came across is to use web pages as our learning materials. And in this case, here's the kind of practical situation that we often come across. Imagine that a web page contains quite a lot of materials on it. Imagine that you are reading CNN news web page, and there are tons of stuff that are irrelevant for the news story that you want to talk about. So we want to, again, use part of the web page for our teaching purposes, but not the entire page. So technically the job is to, for example, we want to share a web page with our students, but in particular, we want to share part of the web page with our students. Now, the way to do that, in my personal experience, are two things. One, for example, we can convert a web page into a PDF and use that PDF as our kind of jumping board or starting point to prepare our reading materials. And on the screen, you should be able to see a link to an online kind of web page to PDF converter. Let me just post in the chat room here. So here's the link to the online web page to PDF files. Once we get that done, for example, we can start working from there. Now, later on, I will talk about annotation stuff. This is the kind of starting point here. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint.
Okay, so another way of sharing part of a web page or a computer screen is to use some other applications. In my PowerPoint, I gave you two links to, I listed two kind of plugins or applications. One is called Awesome Screenshot app. This is a Chrome extension. It means that you have to use Chrome to do that. And let me show the demo here. Okay, I'm going to paste the URL here so that you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so here is a online class schedule. For example, we can use to have students practice talking about their learning schedule, their class schedule. And on this page, all these menus are not necessary. All we want is this class schedule table here. Now, the thing is that, of course, you can copy paste into Microsoft Word and share the Word document with your students. But we want to keep the original format. And here I've already got my awesome screenshot extension installed. If you want to know how, and this is how you do it. So you go to the settings for Chrome and you choose extension, and you can search. You can get more extensions and search for awesome screenshot. So let's move back to my screen here. Now this is my this is the stuff I want for my students to look at, to learn, and I've already got awesome screenshot installed. So in this case, I just want to use part of the web page for my teaching purposes. And I'm using awesome screenshot to get the things I want. And this is what this is a screen capture from that particular web page. Now with awesome screenshot, you can do lots of things. For example, you can add some, you can do some marking here. And you can also do, you can also add some annotations for students' learning purposes. Once you're done, we can share it with, through Google or just download it onto our computer and share it through other means. Okay, so this is how we would share a a web page. And again, the purpose of doing that is that in comparison with sharing the entire web page, we have done some selection. And later on, I will talk about annotation. Next, I will talk about annotation. So we will just prepare our materials for our students. And now let's move on to our next step in preparing or providing authentic materials for our students. This concerns providing support. Once we have our materials selected, usually the starting point of giving our students some new stuff to learn is to prepare a vocabulary list for learning. And this is the case, for example, if you give your students a piece of text to read, and there may be some new words that are not unknown to your students. And if the number of words are few, you can just, for example, prepare it manually. How about you just want to create a complete word list? And here is what we're going to do here. So we want to use some tools to generate a vocabulary list so that they can be used as kind of assistance for our students. How many of you are familiar with Quizlet? It's a tool that can be used to manually, for example, preparing a vocabulary list for our students. And let me post the links in the chat room. And if you can, I have created a Google form so that people can suggest some other tools. The point is that in my case, I have been unable to. Hold on, I need to turn my PowerPoint here. The vocablist.com is a website that can be used to create vocabulary lists for English. And personally, I've created a tool for Chinese, but I have been unable to find tools that can be used, for example, to generate a word list for Spanish or for French. So if you know any tools, please just post it in the chat room so that we can share with all the participants. And if you can, please take also the survey questions and see if you can make some suggestions. I've already posted the link to my survey form in the chat room. Let me just stop for 1 minute so that you can, a couple of minutes so that you can answer, you can take the survey. Okay, anyway, the survey result is visible once you submit the form. So later on we'll post the results if we have any interesting results from the survey. So this is usually, as I said, in providing support for our students in order to enable learning to take place. So usually we start with a vocabulary list. And again, here's the link. Now the next step is to provide some annotations for the materials that you select for your students. And here, here's one online tool that can be used for annotation purposes. And let me post the link. Okay, so the first tool I want to talk about, or I want to mention, is the lingro.com website. It provides quite a few dictionaries, English to Chinese, English to French, so that it can be used by students, for example, when they want to read and understand a web page. So all you have to do is paste the UI into the online, into its kind of input field, and then you should be able to do it. Since we don't have enough time, so I will just move on with other tools. And in the case of annotations, for example, we can use Plago for Chinese, and I'm pretty sure you know the dictionary app or the annotation apps for your own language. Now, there's one more thing I want to mention as far as annotation tools are concerned. This is for online documents. In the case of PDF files, for example, we can use Acrobat Reader, use the comment feature or sticky notes feature as a way to annotate materials for our students. And in the case of Microsoft Word document, for example, we can just simply use the comment feature or track changes feature to add some information, to add some text or explanation, add some notes for our students. So this is the annotation tools. And if you know any other tools that you have been used for annotations, please post it, share it in the chat room so that others can learn about it. Okay, so the another one very important aspect for providing assistance for students to learn stuff is to use, for example, social media for sharing resources, and especially to use it as a kind of tool to enable interaction between the instructor and the students. When, for example, students have difficulties in understanding or comprehending the materials that you provide. And later I'll mention, we'll share one in case of Chinese. I'm pretty sure then there are some other tools for other languages. So once you have, imagine that once we're done with our selection and preparation, once we have all our kind of assets ready for our students, the next big thing is to design some activities so that students can use them as a learning guide to comprehend the materials. And also it will give them a chance to practice making use of the materials that have been provided. And this includes, for example, we can use all these built-in quiz engines from our learning management systems. And if you're familiar with Moodle, for example, it has its kind of built-in quiz engines. And so it's the case with D2L or Blackboard. Now, here's something I want to share with you that can be used in an online setting. And in this case, let's try with the Quizzes online gaming tool. And this one is particularly interesting as compared to Kahoot because students can work on their own, and also it can be used in an online environment where there's no projection screen that everybody can see. So this one can be played online. Let me paste the URL in the chat room first. Now this is what the instructor will see. If you can see my screen here. Let me just share my own screen. And on your own computer, you should be able to see the student end. So this is kind of a way to show you how to use one. And this one can be used, for example, in the case of online teaching, where teachers and students don't actually meet face to face. And this one, again, doesn't require a projection screen, and it can be used online. Okay, let me just end again. And of course, as the instructor, then we can, for example, see the results and do some exports for record keeping purposes. Similar to quizzes, I'm pretty sure many people have used Kahoot, and Quizlet just came out with this Quizlet Live, which is also a kind of online game that can be used for teaching purposes. Okay, so this is some ways of designing activities so to help students either to comprehend your teaching materials or to allow students to the opportunity to use the language. Now, in addition to creating single activities, we can also use, for example, TED-Ed to create a complete lesson. And if you have watched this workshop, the first session of the workshop, then you should be able to see the format of TED lesson. You'll have a video to watch, and then you'll do some activity practices, and then you can also participate in discussions. Okay, so this is another tool to use, and then we also have another aspect. We want to facilitate, for example, practices and interactions with our students. And this is really important when we want to use authentic materials to enrich our textbook language. Because usually, as compared with textbook materials, authentic materials don't have all these study companions or notes for students to read and to share. So we want to create some opportunities for students to ask questions or just to work on the material themselves. And in the old days, BBS or discussion boards are probably the main tool where students can use. But nowadays, we most often use social media for this group projects or interaction. And in the case of, for example, I teaching Chinese, a social kind of, it's a messenger, it's a message. WeChat is a mobile app that people use for social networking. And we have been using that for our Chinese classes where students just post, for example, a link to a website, and then they can also upload images, and they can also chat. Everything is in one place, and because this one is mobile based, so it's very convenient if all your students are kind of scattered everywhere, and they also don't, for example, you follow the same time schedule when they do their online work. So again, so social media is probably better nowadays because of its convenience and because of its so-called multimedia capabilities of sharing everything at one place. Okay, so let's let's do some brainstorming. So imagine that I have found a great website, a web page for use for this lesson, but I want to use only part of the content on the page. So how do I select, for example, some materials from the web page, and how do I prepare and share the part of the web page? So let's use the chat room. Let's use 2-3 minutes so that people can share some ideas on the chat room. Okay, so let me go together with you about some ideas about how to achieve this. And the most straightforward way is to share the URL. If I have a web page, I simply share the URL. If you're using for example, a mobile app, just do the screen capture and share the screen capture. And this is what we have been doing all the time. Or we can also do simple copy and paste if, for example, the materials are mostly text. So in this case, I can just simply copy and paste materials into a Word document and share the Word document. Now, in the case of capturing part of a web page, I've been talking about using, for example, Awesome Screenshot app to capture part of the web page. And another tool that I didn't mention, but I showed it ahead just now, is the Gene, or it's from TechSmith. And with Gene, what we can do with that is that we can do either a capture of the screen, or we can add some annotations verbally using that application. And again, Gene is a desktop application that's been really useful in the case of providing annotations and do screen capture. And if you Google it, you should be able to find the link. Let me just post the link to Gene first. Okay, so again, another method of doing that is, for example, to use to convert a web page into some other format, like a PDF, and I've mentioned some tools that can be used to do that job. But anyway, so you got this idea. To summarize, what we really want are these things when we consider using authentic materials for our teaching purposes. In other words, we want to supplement the textbook language with some real stuff. And the first thing we have to consider is the way how to select and prepare material for our students. And once we pinpoint onto, for example, the material for our students, then we have to think about ways of providing assistance for our learners to use the material. That means that we want to use some annotation tools, we want to build some vocabulary lists, and we want to provide a way for students to ask questions so that learning can take place. And once we got all these two, once we have these two in place, the third aspect that we have to pay attention to is to create some practice opportunities so that students can interact with either the materials or among themselves, so that the materials can be used effectively as a way to supplement the textbook that we want to supplement. So that's the main ideas behind all these ways to enrich textbook language with real stuff or authentic materials. Now, let me mention very briefly about a few issues that people often come across when we deal with authentic materials. The first one is how do we track learner behavior when, for example, the interact with the stuff that we find. This is something very often different from a textbook provided by, for example, a publisher, where all these tracking mechanism are in place. Now, when we add materials to our online system, usually the first point that everybody is interested in is whether our students have used or looked at the materials or not. And again, this time is for example, we want to know the time our students or our learners spent on reading or, for example, viewing the video clip. And another one is, for example, when we share the material using social media, very often the discussion board will become messy in the sense that there are too many questions, or there are each thread or each lead doesn't follow the other one. So in this case, how do we follow, for example, learner interactions on social media? Now, the next one that we have come across, and I'm still looking for solutions for this problem, is how to build the connection between the so-called traditional learning management system and the mobile world. And this is the case when, for example, we move more often onto our mobile phones, but still all our kind of management functions are back in the traditional web world. And again, I'm still looking for solutions. And if you have any good suggestions or any lead that talks about this issue, please let us know. And again, this is kind of interesting issue that one more like that sometimes people come across, and it's worth investigating. Now, another issue that I have come across personally is, for example, how do we track learners' learning progress? And in particular, how do we import learning records from, for example, quizzes onto our language learning management systems? And this is particularly time consuming because we're using different tools from different places on different platforms. How do we consolidate everything into one place? And this is a challenge, and we're still looking for solutions. This is the end of my talk today. So if you have any questions, you can please ask it in the chat room.